Greetings and welcome back. We are now on slide number 9, where we are looking at the scores of these different conversations. So I'm not going to go through these in depth because there is one very simple point that needs to come out of all of this data. And basically what I want to say, if you look at the text up here, it says the first 50 utterances. So when we look at the conversation between the students talking about the assignments, we see that there is a suggestive word score of 27 and a total CPI score of 54. So this is kind of like very low, but if we don't compare this to anything, we don't even know what this is talking about. So let's compare it to the predator-victim conversation. And here we see that there's a suggestive word score of 89 and a CPI score of 178. So let's move on to slide number 10. Okay, but then what we see is that with the perpetrator conversation, this number continues to rise. So after 250 utterances, the CPI is 257, and after 450 utterances, it is 1,104. So while our innocent conversations might peak every once in a while, they will generally have a score that stays below 100, whereas this has very clearly superseded that. Okay, on slide 11, yeah, we can see basically the point of all of this, and that is to show that the dangerous conversations continue to rise, so you can see it on the top there, and that the innocent conversations only rise slightly and peak every once in a while. So let's look at slide number 12. Okay, so there's a couple of things that we can gather from these patterns. And the first thing here is the grooming nature of a predator interaction and the various stages that we see. So what we see is that firstly there's this forming of a friendship. So obviously you're not going to go out and explicitly state your aims as a perpetrator to a victim. You want to establish some form of like rapport, like, hey bro, what's your name? How old are you? You know, find some things that they have in common. And then we move on to the stage of risk assessment. So with this, they find out things such as, are your parents around? You know, how secure is the child's school? How likely is the child to climb into a car with them, and so on. And then at the third level, we see establishing an atmosphere of secrecy and mutual trust. So here a perpetrator will typically tell the victim all sorts of sort of secrets about themselves and then ask the victim questions as well. So they seem to have this like secret bond where they share sort of very, very intimate things with each other. And then finally the fourth stage is where an offline meeting is arranged. So if we look at slide 13, I'm not going to go through this entire list here, but basically what this can help us with is developing some form of strategies to help victims or potential victims cope with suggestive stimuli. So there have been a couple of suggestions along the lines of creating software that parents and kids can have on their computers that will track your conversations and warn you if there's some form of threat potentially. But obviously here we have issues of ethics and confidentiality once again, where people may not want their conversations to be tracked and kept on record. But let's go to slide number 14. Okay, so here we're moving back to the dark web. So what about forensic linguistics in the dark web? So, as we know, the dark web is a place that's completely free from police and it's supposedly entirely anonymous. Nothing can track you. So, if this is the case and you have absolutely no way of identifying a person, what do you do? Well, everybody has to use language, right? So if you're on the dark web, people may not know your name or where you're from or what you look like, but you're still making use of that very individual language that I spoke about at the beginning of the lecture. And this is where we use the idea of your linguistic fingerprint once again, which is a person's very unique use of language. So this links back to the idea of a community of practice. So what we see on the internet is that typically when people interact with each other, they do so in ways that show what form of group they are from. So for example, if you work in IT, then you're going to use a very certain set of terminology that may give away things about you. And according to the linguist Tim Grant, which you should actually go and look up, he's absolutely excellent, his work is fascinating, he says that the starting points of a forensic analysis is having a look at things like gender, age, social background, and location. And what we can do with corpus linguistics is that we can take the language used by people on the dark web or by these individuals, and we can have a look at other information from a corpus. So we can compare and see, okay, so what elements are the same, what are different, and from that we may be able to deduce certain things about people, such as their gender or their age or their social background. So down here I've got a further example of how one could go about doing a linguistic analysis. So I'm going to leave this to you guys to have a look through by yourself. So basically I haven't drawn any massive conclusions from this piece of text. What I've done is just provided this as an example of the steps that you could go through and the things that you could identify when performing a linguistic analysis. And I would like you guys to read through this and make your own, draw your own conclusions about this based on the data that you have down here in front of you, and we will chat about it next week.